Neil Diamond is far more than a singer. He is a storyteller of the American spirit, a man whose voice became the sound of joy, heartbreak, and hope for generations. When he sang Sweet Caroline, he wasn't just performing a hit. He was uniting millions in a chorus that would echo through time. Every note carried something universal, a reminder that no matter how dark life became, there was still something worth singing for. But behind that anthemic voice lay a man shaped by struggle, a child of immigrants, a dreamer from Brooklyn who climbed from obscurity to become one of music's most enduring legends. His life, though gilded with success, was marked by broken marriages, distance from loved ones, and a solitude that even applause couldn't cure. Yet he did what few could. He transformed pain into melody and despair into devotion. Now, at 84, life has taken a cruel turn. Parkinson's disease has silenced the man whose voice once carried stadiums. His hands that once strummed life into lyrics now tremble. But the music remains, a living testament to resilience. The same strength that once built his career now carries him through each uncertain day. He is still fighting, still teaching the world that the measure of greatness isn't in fame or fortune, but in the courage to keep going when your song begins to fade. His journey began far from the spotlight, in a cramped Brooklyn apartment filled with the quiet hum of survival. Born in 1941 to Russian and Polish immigrants, Akiba and Rose Diamond, Neil grew up watching his father struggle as a door-to-door salesman, while his mother held the family together with faith and frugality. They moved often, chasing warmth and work, their lives a patchwork of hope stitched together with sacrifice. When his father went off to war, Neil and his mother left for Wyoming, carrying only what they could hold. In that strange, wind-beaten land, Neil found solace not in people, but in the flickering light of movie screens. There, watching cowboys sing through sorrow, he discovered the power of music, to heal, to endure, to speak when words fail. By 15, music had become his language. A chipped $9 guitar from his parents became his first real companion. In the glow of a bedside lamp, he taught himself to play until his fingertips split. With that pain came a revelation. Music wasn't a dream, it was survival. He wrote his first song, Hear Them Bells, not for fame, but for love. A love that gave him the courage to believe in his own voice. Though he earned a fencing scholarship to New York University, studying pre-med to please his parents, his heart beat to a different rhythm. Between lectures, he wandered to Tin Pan Alley, knocking on publishing house doors with trembling hands and stubborn hope. Rejection followed him like a shadow. Too raw, they'd say. Too sad, but Neil kept writing. Every failure was another verse, every no, another chord. He left college 10 credits short of graduation to chase the only thing that ever made him feel alive. $50 a week writing songs at a small publishing company, that was his leap of faith. When the company folded, he found himself lost and broke in Manhattan, living off coffee and stale rolls, sleeping in a storage room above a jazz club. At night, as the city breathed beneath him, he wrote. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. I didn't have anything else, he later said. Writing was how I stayed alive. His first record, Clown Town, came and went without notice. But then came Sunday and Me in 1965, a small flame that proved his voice mattered. Still, even success came with its price. Record labels demanded easy hits. But Neil wasn't built for hollow songs. He gave them honesty, music that bled truth. From those nights of hunger and heartbreak was born Solitary Man, the anthem of a soul who had seen too much to pretend. He had finally turned suffering into sound. The boy from Brooklyn who once whispered to the dark had found his voice, and through that voice, millions found theirs. His story is not just one of fame, but of endurance, of turning silence into song. And even now, as his voice fades, the music lives on. Proof that true legends don't vanish when the lights go out. They keep singing in the hearts they've healed, even at the height of his fame. When the crowds roared and lights burned bright in his honor, Neil Diamond began to sense something haunting beneath the applause. A soft, lonely rhythm echoing in the quiet between cheers. The more the world sang his words, the less he seemed to hear his own. In 1966, he wrote a song that would shake the globe. I'm a Believer. It was meant for another band, yet it carried his soul. When the Monkees turned it into a worldwide hit, selling millions before it even reached the shelves, the world cheered. But Neil walked home alone through the cold Manhattan streets, his reflection shimmering in puddles of rain. I was proud, he later said softly, but I knew there was more inside me waiting to be heard. That voice would emerge in Solitary Man, a song not written for fame, but for survival. Every sleepless night, every slammed door, every ache that refused to fade, bled into that melody. It didn't make him rich, but it made him real. Then, in 1969, came the moment that changed everything. Sweet Caroline, written in a Memphis hotel room in just an hour, was born not from ambition, but from innocence. When he first performed it, something extraordinary happened. The audience didn't just listen, they became the song. Thousands of voices fused into one, and Neil stood there, humbled. It was magic, he said years later. They made it theirs. From that night onward, Sweet Caroline wasn't just a hit. It became a hymn for connection, sung by strangers who suddenly felt like family. But for Neil, every chorus of joy was followed by a verse of solitude. The world found togetherness in my songs, he once reflected, while I remained the lonely man behind them. The 1970s turned him into a global icon. Cracklin' Rosie, Song Sung Blue, America. Each record bigger than the last. He filled arenas, broke records, and redefined what it meant to be a performer. Yet behind the curtain, his strength faltered. At the Greek Theater in Los Angeles, 1972, he played 10 sold-out nights. The live album Hot August Night became a phenomenon. But backstage, Neil would collapse into a chair, drenched in sweat, his pulse racing. You give everything, he said, and when it's over, there's nothing left. Broadway came next. The Winter Garden Theater, 20 sold-out shows that made him the first rock artist to rule a stage once reserved for Sinatra. Columbia Records signed him for $5 million, a staggering sum for a boy who once lived on coffee and bread. But success carried its own price. He rehearsed 12 hours a day, rewriting until dawn, pushing his voice until it broke. I'd look in the mirror, he later confessed, and not recognize the man staring back. When Hollywood came calling, he accepted, hoping for renewal. Jonathan Livingston Seagull in 1973 failed as a film, but triumphed as a soundtrack, earning him a Grammy and global acclaim. Still, he felt betrayed when his music was altered without his consent. It was like watching someone edit my soul, he said bitterly. Then came The Jazz Singer in 1980. A $3.5 million offer, the highest ever for a first-time actor. The movie stumbled, critics mocked, but his songs rose from the wreckage. Love on the Rocks, Hello Again, and America became timeless anthems. They can laugh at the movie, he told the press, but they can't touch the music. What he didn't reveal was the toll it took. The endless tours, the late nights, the exhaustion, his body began to break. He sang through fever and pain until one night, mid-performance, a sharp agony shot down his spine. The mic slipped from his hand, and the world fell silent. Hours later, doctors discovered a tumor pressing against his spinal cord. Surgery lasted 12 hours. Before he was wheeled away, he wrote farewell letters to his children, uncertain if he'd ever wake or ever sing again. When he opened his eyes, all was white. The walls, the lights, the silence. He tried to speak, but no sound came. Panic rose until a whisper broke free. "Can I still sing?" The nurse nodded, tears falling. Neil smiled, fragile but alive. From the boy who once survived on pocket change to the man commanding millions, he had reached every summit and paid for every one with pieces of himself. "The stage," he once said, "is where I live, and where I die a little each night." When the lights finally dimmed and the audience disappeared into the dark, he was left with nothing but his melody, bruised but unbroken, still echoing through the storm. Because every legend learns the same truth. The higher the climb, the closer you come to the thunder. And when that thunder faded, silence followed. For the first time, Neil Diamond truly heard how loud emptiness could be. Night after night, he made strangers sing in unison. Yet when he returned home, the rooms were hollow. He had earned the world's applause, but lost the gentle music of love. Before fame, before fortune, there had been Jay Posner, the girl who believed in him when no one else did. They met in high school, two dreamers with ink-stained hands and laughter that filled cheap apartments. She became a teacher, he, a songwriter with more lyrics than money. They married in 1963, small, simple, but filled with faith. Their daughters, Marjorie and Elin, were born into a home that once felt infinite. Neil would rock them to sleep, humming songs that had yet to find an audience. Then fame came, fast and unforgiving. "I'm a Believer" turned him into a household name, but the applause that filled arenas emptied his home. Jay would put the girls to bed, then watch him smile on TV, pride in her eyes, but ache in her heart. "He belonged to everyone now," she whispered once, "just not to us." There was no scandal, no blame, just two people standing on opposite sides of a dream that grew too heavy to share. The night he left, rain tapped gently against the windows. He kissed his daughters goodbye, whispering, "I'll be back soon." She nodded, silent but knowing. Outside, a jukebox played one of his songs as he walked into the night, the music following like a ghost. Years later, he would confess, "You can't take your kids on the road, and I took the road." Loneliness didn't end there, it only changed its face. Then came Marcia Murphy, a young television producer whose calmness cut through his chaos. She didn't fall for the legend the world adored. She fell for the man still learning how to be whole again. "She didn't ask for songs," he once said. "She just listened." In her quiet presence, he found what fame had stolen: peace. "It was like breathing after drowning," he said. For a while, love returned, soft and unspoken. But even peace can be fleeting when it belongs to a man who carries the weight of music in his bones. When they married in 1969, it felt as though the universe finally sighed with relief. As if, after years of wandering through loneliness, Neil Diamond had finally found his way home. Their house in Laurel Canyon glowed with the brightness of beginning again. Sunlight spilled through open windows, guitars rested lazily against the walls, and the faint smell of coffee mingled with the sound of new melodies taking shape. Neil would sit barefoot at the piano, his fingers chasing chords while the laughter of children floated through the rooms like a promise. Marcia watched him quietly, her eyes filled with pride and calm, as if she knew the music being born there would one day belong to the world. Those were songs written out of peace, he later reflected, out of being seen and loved for who I was. The early years felt effortless, like breathing in harmony. Their first son, Jesse, arrived in 1970, his cries blending with the rhythm of Cracklin' Rosie. 8 years later, Micah came along, his birth unfolding almost in time with You Don't Bring Me Flowers. For a while, life was a gentle dance of fame and family. Neil carried photographs of his boys in his guitar case, recorded their laughter on tape, and sang lullabies that would one day fill arenas. He believed, for the first time, that he had found balance, that he could keep both the music and the love that gave it meaning. But fame is a jealous companion. The 1970s turned Neil from a man with a dream into an unstoppable force. Beautiful Noise, Song Sung Blue, America. Each hit louder, each tour longer, each crowd larger. The stage lights became his only sunrise, the applause his heartbeat. While he chased sound across continents, Marcia stayed home, raising their sons in a world lit by television screens instead of his presence. She wrapped their birthdays in photographs and told them stories about their father, stories the world already knew by heart. He always came back, she told a friend quietly. Just not all of him. By the late 1980s, even love was exhausted. The man who had given his soul to the stage had little left for home. "You can't give the world everything," he once confessed, "and still have enough left to go around." The marriage dissolved not in anger, but in silence. The kind of silence that grows slowly until it fills every room. Words stopped meaning anything. The laughter faded, and one day, without fanfare, the music between them ended. "We just ran out of road," Neil said later. The touring never stopped until love did. In 1995, after 26 years, they finally let go. The world called it one of Hollywood's costliest divorces, $150 million. But to Neil, it was never about money. "She was worth every penny," he said softly. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a deep, quiet sorrow. He had spent a lifetime building something the world adored, yet somehow lost the one thing that truly made it home. When the last box was carried out, the house felt hollow. Jesse left for college. Micah stayed behind with his camera, trying to capture a father who had become more memory than man. Neil hugged them both, his voice trembling. "I'll call every day," he promised. They nodded but said nothing. Sometimes silence is what love sounds like when it's too tired to speak. Years later, Jesse would say, "The world had him. We didn't," Micah added softly. "He was there when it mattered, even when he wasn't." By the time Neil turned 55, the applause had softened, the lights had dimmed, and the road no longer felt like salvation. And then, in Australia, he met Ray Farley, a woman who didn't see the superstar, only the man who looked like he hadn't rested in years. She was calm where he was restless, grounded where he was drifting. "Ray made me feel young again," he said later. "She reminded me who I was before the noise." Their love didn't burn. It glowed. Gentle, steady, kind. She traveled with him sometimes, standing quietly in the wings while the crowd roared. When he came off stage, she didn't ask for stories. She offered silence. Home, for the first time in years, was no longer a place. It was a person. But in 2003, life shifted again. Ray suffered a back injury that left her bedridden. Neil, for once, stopped running. He stayed. Through pain, through long hospital nights, through quiet prayers that never made the headlines. "All I could do," he said, "was hold her hand." It was love without performance, stripped of fame, just two souls learning what devotion really means. But even devotion can fade. As the years passed, the warmth between them cooled into memory. Sometimes, Neil admitted, love doesn't end. It just runs out of road. In 2008, Ray returned to Australia, and Neil stayed behind, older, quieter, surrounded by echoes. "I loved her with all my heart," he would later say. But sometimes love isn't enough. And then, when he least expected it, love found him again. Her name was Katie McNeil. She was part of his tour management team, 30 years younger but wise beyond her age. She saw him not as a fading star, but as a man still capable of laughter. "I wasn't looking for love anymore," Neil said. "It found me anyway." Their relationship began softly, between rehearsals and late-night edits of lyrics. She steadied him. "Katie had calm," he said. "She quieted the storm I carried." By 2012, They married under the California sun in a small, private ceremony. No spotlight, no audience, just peace. Together, they built a slower life. Mornings with coffee on the porch. Afternoons filled with music that no longer needed to prove anything. She gave me a home I didn't have to sing for, Neil said with a quiet smile. But the years brought new challenges. His body began to betray him. The tremors worsened. Fatigue grew heavier. Katie became his caretaker. His voice when he couldn't find his own. Some nights, she'd wake to find him at the piano, hands trembling over the keys. "You don't have to," she'd whisper. He'd smile faintly. "The music's still there," he'd say. "It just takes longer to find it." Their love became a duet between strength and surrender. Not the wildfire of youth, but the steady flame that refuses to go out, even when the wind rises. Katie once shared in an interview, "He doesn't have to be Neil Diamond for me. I just need him to be Neil." That love, steady, unwavering, became the quiet rhythm that kept him alive. When the world learned about his Parkinson's diagnosis in 2018, and the lights of touring dimmed for good, it was Katie who helped him release the burden he had carried for decades. Not the love of music, but the pressure to perform. "She saved me from needing to prove anything," he confided to a friend. "For the first time, I could just exist." Now, in the stillness of their Colorado home, surrounded by mountains and the hush of snow, peace has finally taken the place of applause. The man who once filled arenas now sings only for one listener. Some evenings, as the wind brushes against the windows, Katie sits close beside him, her hand in his, while he hums the melodies that once echoed across the world. "Sweet Caroline," "Hello Again," "Love on the Rocks." She listens with her eyes closed, smiling through the quiet tears that come with memory. There are no flashing lights, no cameras, no encores, just two souls who have mastered the truest harmony of all: staying. "She came into my life when I needed grace," Neil once said softly. "She taught me that love doesn't shout. It waits, it forgives, it endures." After years spent chasing the roar of adoration, he now ends his days in the gentle silence of devotion, where the only ovation is the heartbeat next to his own. On quiet nights, when Katie drifts to sleep and the house settles into calm, he sometimes lies awake, eyes tracing the ceiling, thinking about the man he used to be, and the man who taught him how to become one. All the love, distance, triumphs, and regrets lead him back to a single place, Brooklyn, and to a single voice, his father's. When the night grows deep and the air still, he can almost hear it again. Akiva Kiev Diamond was not a man of wealth or fame. He was a merchant, a dreamer, a man who carried quiet pride in hands worn thin by work. It was Kiev who taught his son that real success wasn't in applause or headlines. It was in doing things with integrity. "He didn't talk much," Neil once said, "but when he did, I remembered every word." In those early Brooklyn days, when rent was overdue and dinner was never certain, Neil watched his father move from job to job, never once giving up. He remembered the scent of fabric from the dry goods store, the faint jingle of coins that never seemed to add up. "He worked harder than anyone I've ever known," Neil said. "And he did it all for us." Even when Kiev was serving in the war, he sent letters home to his little boy, not filled with fear, but with faith. It was from those letters that Neil first learned the rhythm of words, the pulse of storytelling, the melody of hope. When Kiev returned from service, they were still poor, but they were together. And to Neil, that was everything. Years later, when success finally arrived, Neil never forgot the lessons from that tiny Brooklyn apartment. Before every tour, he would call his father. "He always asked if I was eating enough," Neil laughed. "I could be on top of the charts, and he'd still ask about soup." But in the mid-1980s, illness came quietly. Keeve was diagnosed with cancer. Neil's world, once bursting with sound, fell silent. He left the studio, flew home, and sat beside the bed of the man who had been his first hero. "It's okay," Keeve whispered. "You did good, son." Neil would later say it was the hardest moment of his life, not just because he was losing his father, but because he realized how deeply he'd been living to make him proud. When his father passed, Neil couldn't write. The guitar stayed untouched. "The world had gone out of tune," he said softly. Then one sleepless night, he picked up a pen, not to write a song, but to pray. What poured out wasn't melody yet, but love, gratitude, and a son's final letter to his father. Years later, when someone asked Neil what success really meant, he smiled and said, "It means my dad was right to believe in me." In that quiet answer lived everything: grief, pride, and the music that would never truly fade. After losing his father, Neil leaned on the one person who still remembered the boy behind the fame: his brother, Harvey. They had shared everything growing up in Brooklyn. One bed, one battered radio, one impossible dream. Harvey was the calm to Neil's fire, the first to believe his songs were worth something. "He was my first audience," Neil said. "He believed before anyone else did." As Neil's world expanded, Harvey's stayed simple: steady job, loving family, quiet joy. Every holiday, he'd raise a glass and tease, "Just remember me when you're famous." And Neil always did. No matter how loud the world became, he never missed his brother's call. Then, in the early 2000s, the laughter stopped. Harvey had fallen ill, the kind of sickness that leaves no warning. Neil was on tour when the call came. He dropped everything and flew home. In the sterile hospital light, Harvey smiled faintly. "You writing anything new?" he asked. Neil squeezed his hand. "Not yet," he whispered. "I'm waiting for you to tell me which one's good." But the days grew shorter. Machines replaced laughter, and when Harvey's fight ended, Neil stayed beside him, holding the same hand that once clapped for him in their kitchen, unable to say goodbye. "I lost my first believer," he said quietly. For months, he couldn't sing. The world cheered, but the sound no longer reached him. Even now, when the crowd joins in Sweet Caroline, he closes his eyes and listens for a harmony only he can hear. "Maybe love doesn't leave," he said once. "Maybe it just moves to another seat." If Harvey was the rhythm of his youth, Rose Diamond was its heart. Before the world sang his songs, she sang them to him, off-key but full of love. She was his first believer, the keeper of warmth in a small Brooklyn home where hope and hunger shared the same space. Rose mended clothes, cooked with whatever she could find, and prayed softly over her sons. "Do good work," she'd tell him, "and let the work speak for you." Neil would one day say, "Everything I am began with her voice." Even as fame carried him across oceans, her voice followed. She called before every show with the same words, "Sing from your heart, Noodle." The nickname embarrassed him on tour, but in truth, it was his good luck charm. Then came 2006. Her heart, tired from a lifetime of giving, began to fail. Neil left the stage and went home. He sat beside her, watching the rhythm that had guided him falter. She smiled one last time and whispered, "Keep singing, sweetheart. That's how you stay close to me." After she passed, her photograph found a permanent place on his piano, the same one she had once dusted every morning. "My mother taught me love, work, and belief," he said. Everything else was just the echo. And in that echo, her song still lives. By then, few people remained who truly remembered the boy from Brooklyn. But one last friendship endured: Glenn Campbell. They were brothers in spirit, two men who turned hardship into harmony. They met in the late 1960s, when the world was young and loud, and music felt like freedom. Glenn's guitar could say what Neil's words could not. Their friendship was built on quiet understanding. The kind that doesn't need explaining. We didn't have to talk, Neil said. We just understood what a song cost. As the years went by, their bond deepened. Late-night jam sessions, long tours, laughter that filled the empty spaces fame left behind. When Glenn began to lose himself to Alzheimer's, Neil was one of the first to reach out. Watching his friend fade was like watching a melody dissolve into silence. "It broke my heart," Neil whispered. "The world forgot his words, but I never will." He was fading, and all anyone could do was keep his songs alive. When Glenn passed away in 2017, the silence that followed cut deeper than applause could ever reach. Neil withdrew completely. No interviews, no cameras, no public words. Instead, he wrote a single line. "Goodbye, my friend. You showed me how to find light, even when the melody fades." It wasn't just a tribute. It was a confession. For years, Glenn had been his reflection. The reminder that even legends are fragile, and even music can't outlast time. After the funeral, Neil sat alone at his piano, the same one that had carried every memory and ghost before. The keys were cool beneath his fingertips, the air still, the world waiting. And then he began to hum, a melody half his, half Glenn's. That's what true friendship leaves behind. Not silence, but a song unfinished, waiting to be continued someday. But now, after a lifetime of goodbyes, to his father, his brother, his mother, his friends, Neil Diamond was preparing for one last farewell. This time, he wasn't saying goodbye to someone he loved. He was saying goodbye to himself. It began softly, the way all heartbreak does. His hands, once steady and sure, began to tremble. His powerful voice, once able to command a stadium, started to waver. Small things, a glass of water, a shirt button, a guitar string, became mountains to climb. And yet, every morning, he woke up hoping, maybe today will be better. But it wasn't. The man who once ruled stages with a single gesture now fought against his own body, against the very rhythm that had defined him. He had faced pain before. In 1979, at the height of his fame, he collapsed mid-performance. The roar of the crowd turned to panic as doctors rushed him into a 12-hour surgery to remove a spinal tumor. Before they put him under, he scribbled farewell notes to his children, terrified he might wake to a world without music. His first words after surgery were a whisper filled with fear and hope. "Can I still sing?" And he could. For another 40 years, he did, until life demanded another fight. In January 2018, the diagnosis came: Parkinson's disease. 3 words that changed everything. "It can't be," he told the doctor. "I still have work to do." But Parkinson's does not listen. It steals slowly. The rhythm, the steadiness, the certainty. For an artist whose body was his instrument, it was the cruelest kind of thief. The man who once glided across the stage now stumbled on flat ground. His voice still burned bright, but his body had begun to betray the song. "I didn't want to believe it," he admitted. "For a long time I kept pretending I could still outrun it. But time always wins." 2 years later, he stood before the mirror and saw not the legend, but a fragile man clinging to faith. And with tears in his eyes, he made the hardest choice of his life: to step away from the stage. "It's with great reluctance," he said, "but this is the hand I've been given, and I'll make the best of it." When the world heard the news, millions cried, not just because their hero was sick, but because they knew he would have sung until his last breath if he could. Now, at 84, time has slowed his fire but not his spirit. His movements are gentler, his steps measured, his voice quieter. Yet his eyes still hold that same spark that once lit up the world. Some days are kind, others cruel. His hands stiffen, his energy fades, but he still hums. He hums to remember, to resist, to remain alive. "When I sing," he says softly. Everything inside me still works together. That is courage, not the kind that fills arenas, but the kind that endures in hospital rooms and sleepless nights. He now spends his days in his mountain home in Colorado, surrounded by quiet, snow, and the woman who has stood by him through every storm. His piano sits by the window, bathed in morning light. Some days he plays, some days he only touches the keys, gently, as though reminding them that the music is still his. Parkinson's may have taken his balance, but not his will. It may have slowed his rhythm, but the melody endures. "I've found peace," he said once. "I'm softer with others now, and with myself." He no longer performs for the world, but the world still sings for him. Sweet Caroline continues to echo through stadiums, the crowd shouting, "So good! So good! So good!" But now, those words mean something deeper. Not celebration, but survival. And when he hears them, he smiles. Because somewhere in that chorus, he's still there. The man, the music, the soul. Today, his fortune stands near $300 million, a reflection of 6 decades of relentless artistry, sold-out tours, and songs that stitched themselves into America's story. Yet wealth has never been his measure of success. His $8 million mountain estate feels less like luxury and more like gratitude. Built of glass, wood, and silence, it overlooks the Rockies, a view that reminds him daily of how far he's come from the boy in Brooklyn with a $9 guitar. Gold and platinum records shimmer on the walls, not as trophies, but as memories. His first Cadillac, his tour Bentley, and the old Mercedes he drives now sit quietly in his garage, each one a relic of a different chapter. He still keeps that same $9 guitar from his youth, framed beside the handwritten lyrics to Sweet Caroline. "Everything I have," he once said, "came from the same place, hope." His generosity mirrors his journey. Over the years, he has quietly donated millions to Parkinson's research, veterans programs, and children's hospitals. "I've been blessed," he told a friend. "The best use of success is giving some of it back." At home, surrounded by his wife Katie and his children, Marjorie, Elin, Jesse, and Micah, he has found what matters most. Laughter, warmth, family. "It's not about the spotlight," he said once. "It's about who's there when the lights go out." Though he no longer tours, his story lives on through a beautiful noise, the Broadway musical celebrating his life. Each night, as the crowd rises to sing Sweet Caroline, he smiles. "They're still singing," he says. That means the music's still alive. These days begin quietly. A slow walk through the garden, a touch of sunlight, a few notes on the piano just to feel them again. "I used to chase the world," he reflected. "Now I let it come to me." There's no regret in his voice, only peace, the kind that comes from a life fully lived. Neil Diamond's story isn't just about fame or fortune. It's the song of a man who turned loneliness into art, who gave everything to make the world sing, and who found grace in surrender. From poverty to platinum, from pain to peace, his journey stands as proof that greatness isn't in how loud we sing, but how long we keep the melody alive. So tonight, wherever one of his songs plays, if it lifts your heart or stirs an old memory, whisper a quiet thank you. Not for the legend, but for the man who showed us that even when the voice trembles, the song can still go on.